There are coincidences that have happened in people's lives that appear to go beyond the norm, where the odds of it happening were 100 to 1. They were an event that happened in a meaningful manner, as if they were meant to happen and were a meaningful coincidence. The following are 7 stories that tell of amazing coincidences and incredible odds. Number 7. German mother. In the early 1900s, photos were taken on individual photographic plates, and these were developed by specialist shops. In 1914, a German mother took a photo she had taken of a young son to a shop in Strasbourg to be developed. Before she could collect the photo, war broke out, and she was unable to return to Strasbourg. 2 years later, in 1916, the woman had another child and purchased a photographic plate to take a picture of her new baby daughter. She was now living in Frankfurt, and after taking the photo, presented the plate to be developed. When she went to collect her picture, she was annoyed at first as it showed a double exposure, i.e. one picture on top of another. She couldn't work out how this could possibly have happened. She was definite that she'd only taken one photo. Then she looked more closely at the photo and was stunned to see that the new picture of her daughter had been superimposed over that of her son, the photo she'd previously taken 2 years before. By some strange coincidence, the film plate had somehow been transferred from Strasbourg to Frankfurt and was marked in error as being unused. This was subsequently sold to the woman so she could take a photo of her daughter. The photo of her son had been returned to her, of which she thought she had permanently lost, and yet in the most bizarre coincidence. Number 6. Anne Parish. Acclaimed American writer Anne Parish was born in 1888 in Colorado Springs, Colorado. In 1920, while she was holidaying in Paris with her husband, they were browsing some bookshops. She picked up a book and told her husband that she used to have a copy of this particular book, Jack Frost and Other Stories, when she was a child. It had been a gift, and just seeing this book brought back wonderful memories of her childhood. Her husband took the book and opened it. On the inside cover, in Anne's handwriting, was an inscription reading Anne Parish, 209 North Weber Street, Colorado Springs. It was the very same book that she'd had as a child. What were the chances of a childhood book not only moving from Colorado Springs to a Paris bookshop, but being found by the original owner? That was not only an amazing coincidence, but a downright eerie coincidence. Number 5. Anthony Hopkins. The British actor Anthony Hopkins, who had that famous role as Hannibal Lecter in Silence of the Lambs, had landed a leading role in a film based on the book The Girl from Petrovska by George Pfeiffer. A few days after signing the contract, Hopkins was in London and decided to buy a copy of the book. He tried several bookshops but was unable to find a single copy. Later, as Hopkins was waiting at Leicester Square Underground station to catch the train home, he noticed a book that had been apparently discarded on a bench. To his absolute amazement, it was The Girl from Petrovska. Now, if he thought that was an amazing coincidence in itself, it gets even weirder. 2 years later, in the middle of filming in Vienna, Hopkins was visited by George Pfeiffer, the author of The Girl from Petrovska. Pfeiffer mentioned that he did not have a copy of his own book. He had lent his copy containing his own annotations to a friend who had lost it somewhere in London. In total astonishment, Hopkins handed Pfeiffer the book he had found. "Is this your copy?" he asked, with the notes scribbled in the margins. It was the same book he'd lost years before. Number 4. Robert Fallon. In 1858, Robert Fallon was shot dead in the middle of a game of poker, where they claimed he'd been cheating after he'd won the $600 pot. With Fallon seemed empty and none of the other players willing to take the now unlucky $600, they found a new player to take Fallon's place and staked him the dead man's $600. By the time the police had arrived to investigate the killing, the new player had turned the $600 into $2,200 in winnings. The police demanded the original $600 be passed on to Fallon's next of kin, only to discover the new player turned out to be Fallon's son, who had not seen his father in 7 years. Number 3. Jim Lewis and Jim Springer. In 1940, at only 3 weeks of age, 2 twin boys were put up for adoption. Their new parents coincidentally named them both James. As they grew older, they were both named Jim for short. Nothing unusual there, you might think. As it turns out, the two would grow up only 40 miles apart from each other in Ohio and would go on to live lives that were strangely similar. One of the boys was adopted by the Lewises of Lima and the other by the Springers of Pica. Both families knew that the child they adopted had a twin, but did not know what became of them. Now, this is where this story gets very, very strange. Both had childhood dogs named Toy, and as children, both were good at maths and woodwork, but were terrible at spelling. When they grew up, they both married twice, and their first wives were both called Linda. Both marriages ended up in divorce and later remarried, each to a woman named Betty. Jim Lewis and Jim Springer each had a son, and they called their sons James. Both Jims were heavy smokers, both drove a Chevrolet and had similar jobs in security. Jim Lewis was a security guard while Jim Springer had been a deputy sheriff. They even took vacations at the same Florida beach. Neither man knew any of these coincidences about each other until Jim Lewis, then aged 37, decided to try and get into contact with his twin. In 1977, he was legally able to get details about his twin brother through the Ohio courthouse. The brothers spoke on the phone and agreed to meet on February the 9th, 1979. Their amazing string of coincidences soon reached medical authorities, where they realised how valuable they could be in the study of twins. Both Jims took part in a study conducted by Dr. Thomas Bouchard of the University of Minnesota, who found that their medical histories and brainwave tests were almost identical. So too were their results in a personality test. Because of their uncanny similarities throughout their lives, was this a case as possible proof of telepathic connections between twins? Jim Springer did state that he always felt an emptiness. Was there somehow an unconscious connection between them? Number 2, Erskine Lawrence Ebbin. Unfortunately, there was nothing meaningful and there was never a positive outcome in the following incident, and was a tragic coincidence. In July 1975, newspapers on both sides of the Atlantic reported the death of 7-year-old Erskine Lawrence Ebbin, who had been knocked off his moped by a taxi in Hamilton, Bermuda, and killed. But this is where this story takes a strange twist, because the previous year, his brother was killed on the same street, also by a taxi, and he was also 17. The coincidence gets stranger when it turns out that they were killed by the same taxi with the same driver and the same passenger. To add further tragedy to this story, it was the same moped, and this happened almost exactly 1 year later. Number 1, Michael Dick. Michael Dick had not seen his grown-up daughter Lisa for more than a decade after he had been separated from his first wife. All he knew was that his 21-year-old daughter had moved to Sudbury, Suffolk, UK. He decided to go to Sudbury with his daughters Samantha and Shannon in the hope of locating her. However, because he had absolutely no information to go on, the search ended fairly quickly. This did not deter him, so he then decided to contact the local paper and ask whether they could help out. A photographer from Suffolk Free Press took a photo of the three of them and said it would be published in the next edition of their paper. This is where the story gets very weird, when it turns out there were more than just the three of them in the photo when the photographer snapped the shot. His missing daughter had not only seen the photo in the local paper, but on closer inspection recognised herself and her mother in the background. It turns out that she and her mother had been standing in the exact spot where the picture had been taken about a minute earlier, and she could see them walking away. Lisa said that before she saw the picture, she'd been thinking about her father and had told friends just a few days before the article was published that she should try to find him. Through that series of coincidences, both had now been reunited.